with Michael Macaulay, a partner with Lawson Lundell, LLP. Michael led the opening of the Kelowna office and is a mentor in our Mentor to Market program. Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit about Lawson Lundell and the capabilities of the firm?
Yeah, thanks very much, Camille. So we are a Western Canadian regional firm focused on Western Canada and the North. In addition to our Kelowna and Vancouver offices, we also have offices in Calgary and in Yellowknife. And we are a full-service business law firm, so practicing in the areas of corporate, commercial, securities, real estate, tax, debt financing, and a big piece of that for us, in particular in our Kelowna office, is a focus on the technology and innovation sector and working with early and growth stage companies as well as part of that. So thanks very much for having me here today, Camille, and always a pleasure to collaborate with you at UBC, whether it's in the Okanagan campus or in Vancouver.
Well, as you know, many of our ventures at this stage are moving into a pilot stage. They're starting to work with industry partners or strategic partners to test out their innovation. Why should they be considering incorporation at this stage?
Yeah, great question, and I think that is something that a lot of ventures struggle with, is when is the right time to incorporate. And so often what we see is it is prompted by exactly that scenario. They have a commercial partner, there's a contract that's been tabled in front of them, and they get it and they see that there's a bullet where the company's name should be, and they go, right, I guess we should have a company. It would be embarrassing to go back and tell them we don't have that yet, and then they come over and it's a bit of a scramble to get something set up. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate sort of the thought and planning that needs to go in a little bit in advance to get that pulled together properly. And other reasons, so that desire to have an entity to contract with and save face and look professional and look like you've been around for more than a week or two, that's a good reason to incorporate. But a better reason, and probably the chief reason, really is to take advantage of the limited liability that corporations provide. And so what that is, people probably hear that tossed around, is effectively a corporation can act as a liability shield between the founders and either consumers or its customers, clients, counterparties to contracts. And that's a really important feature. If you're entering into contracts with larger commercial industrial entities, larger businesses, you don't want them to be able to sue you personally if something goes wrong in that business relationship or there's a breach of that contract somewhere. Similarly, and even more importantly, if you're running sort of a web-based business that's consumer-facing, an e-commerce platform, for example, you really don't want sort of global liability to whoever it is out there, in the consumer world that may take issue with your terms of use or your privacy policies or some breach there. And if you're doing that and you're operating that business, sort of as an individual, you're a sole proprietor and you're going to have that liability personally. They can come after you and take your personal assets. If you're doing that as a group of founders, you've actually inadvertently created a general partnership. That is the plural of sole proprietor. If you do that with more than one person, you're undertaking a business with the view to a profit. That's a partnership. That's common law. And you can do that, create that without really knowing that that's what you're doing, which creates a host of other problems that we can touch on a little bit later, I'm sure. But chief among them is you're open to that liability. You can't be sued directly, whereas the corporation creates a barrier.
When you talk about liability, you're indicating that if their technology fails to perform to the level that the industrial partner or the client anticipated, they could be held personally liable for damages. Is that?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, any failure of that product, if there's a failure, I mean, if it's you're talking about a product in an industrial setting and there's an accident or, you know, harm to people or assets, your liability can be enormous there. And you, of course, will try and protect that through the contract as well, because you want to limit the liability that's going to go back to the corporation. But, you know, it's a very scary place to be if you, as an individual, have all of your personal assets, your family's assets sort of exposed to, you know, essentially uncapped liability for some of those big issues. So, yeah, I mean, it's a scary thing, and you see some entrepreneurs sort of get out into that space without even realizing what it is that they're doing and how much risk there really is.
I wanted to ask you to explain how being incorporated would protect the team from that kind of action on the part of a partner.
Yeah, so yeah, great question. And I'd say certainly for the ventures that you see coming out of a university context or an academic context, you know, protecting the IP is another good reason to incorporate. And I should sort of maybe recast that as it's not so much protecting the IP, but containing it and identifying what that is, and making sure that there's sort of some clear boundaries around the ownership. So, you know, when you incorporate, you're going to want to assign all that IP into it. If you're just a bunch of individuals who are running it, you know, in your lab, or it's a student project, which are often where you see sort of the IP being generated in a lot of these ventures coming out of academic settings, you know, you have a bunch of people who've all created or authored parts of it. And, you know, if they all just take off and go their own way, you don't have an intact IP. You might have most of it, and you might not have all the knowledge, and maybe it's sitting on a computer, but you don't have a right to use it. And you may be chasing people who've moved off to go do a postdoc at a different institution and trying to find a way to license that or get them to assign that IP back. And if you're at a place where you've already gone on and started doing commercial transactions, the value of that IP may have gone way up, and you may find yourself, you know, in a bit of a standoff where these people want, you know, very expensive royalties or bigger pieces of equity and different things. So, you know, really you're best off to get those sorts of things resolved early and move that IP into the corporation, put it in a box and say, great, you know, where are all the pieces of this IP? Let's assign it all in. You know, you created something, I created something. Let's all assign it into the company, so the company owns the whole package and it has all the rights in it that it needs. And then instead of sort of fighting over, you know, what the value of my piece is or your piece, you know, risking somebody trying to extract more value later on, we can at a very early stage say, great, and now what's the share ownership of this entity that holds the IP? And that's going to dictate sort of what everybody's level of interest is in that IP. You know, I've seen, you know, sort of astute entrepreneurs in cases where they've decided they don't even want to go ahead with the venture and say, you know what, but we do still want to incorporate and put that IP into this entity because, you know, frankly, if I'm going to go off and exploit this in some other venture or a piece of this IP in a different venture, which I might, or my business partner, you know, or former business partner wants to do the same, you know, I want them to have to sort of come through us and pay a royalty to this entity to use it, because it really is still our idea. It's not his, it's not mine. And split IP and saying, you know, joint ownership doesn't really work. There's no value there. Once you sort of catalog the IP, you've got it, you've put it into a box, you know that the company owns it all, then to the extent you're contracting with counterparties and industrial partners, you know, it's more easily identifiable what that IP is. And I guess I should clarify as well. Some people always aren't clear, you know, when we're talking about IP, it's not just ideas that are patentable, and it's not just sort of brands and trademarks, but it's everything. It's all the work product, it's the business plans, it's your marketing plans, it's, you know, early sketches, it's, you know, schematics, it's prototypes, it's formulas. It can be, you know, basically any part of the idea or sort of concept or business that your team has been thinking about, and you want to make sure sort of all of that is owned by that company.